Start up our hearing. Well, welcome Unit 3 from Glen Allen High School. We are delighted to see you this morning. Officially, welcome. I'm Emily Voss. I'll be your facilitator and your timekeeper, and I'm your state coordinator. I'm joining you this morning from James Madison's Montpelier, so you have some Madisonian vibes coming your way this morning. And in just a second, I'm going to hand things over to your judges. They'll introduce themselves, and they'll ask you to do the same. They'll read your question. You know which one it is by now, but for the benefit of the recording, we'll go through the question, and then they'll ask you to go ahead and begin with your prepared statement. And then we'll proceed just like you practiced. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to your Unit 3 judge panel.
Okay, well, thank you, Emily, and welcome to the Virginia team here. You get the feeling, judges, there are a whole lot of Virginia people here, more than usual even. Well, welcome and congratulations on being here. We look forward to having a good conversation with you. You've been studying the Constitution. Mr. Van Valkenburg has gotten you prepared for this. Relax, we're gonna have fun today. My name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at Clemson University in South Carolina. And always good to see people from Virginia. I've gotten into practice of sending people up to your law school there at UVA. So I try to maintain some connections in the state. And my fellow judges will introduce themselves.
I'm Mike Miles. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and Dr. Stewart will read you a question in a minute, but I think our real discussion today is going to be on the poor job the political parties in Virginia have done in choosing the members of the House of Delegates. I just have never seen a poorer quality of representation than you have to endure up there, and it's going to be your job to fix that in some way or another, and we'll get to that in just a minute. It's good to see you this morning.
I'm Donald Rogers. I'm retired from teaching history at Central Connecticut State University, a long champion and participant in the We the People program, judged it for many years, and I look forward to your comments. You can relax. You've got a lot of knowledge. You do a great job, and we look forward to your comments.
Please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Charles Taylor, and our teachers are Mr. Van Valkenburg and Mr. Conway.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Linton.
Hello, my name is Emerson.
Hi, my name is Marcy.
And hi, I'm Layla.
Okay, well, great, thank you. Well, I'll read the question. They need this for recording purposes, as I keep saying, so that when this video goes viral, they'll know what you're talking about.
And it may just do that.
Yeah. This is it's a quotation from a letter that John Adams wrote. There is nothing I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and in opposition to each other. What issues led to the formation of the original political parties? To what extent have those issues persisted in American politics? What are the advantages and disadvantages of a unified or divided government? You may begin.
All right. For over two centuries, American politics have been dominated by political parties. The beginning of a two-party system started as early as ratification and, since 1860, has solidified into competition between the Democratic and Republican parties. In his farewell address to the nation, George Washington pleaded for Americans to refrain from parties, stating that they will allow unprincipled men to subvert the power of the people and to usurp the reins of government for themselves. However, others believe that the increased competitions and reforms driven by political parties are beneficial. The historian Sean Wilentz has argued that, quote, the rage for a modern post-partisanship has also ignored the historical reality that partisanship, although often manipulated and abused, has been Americans' most effective vehicle for democratic social and political reform. American parties have generally been divided along Hamiltonian and Jeffersonian lines. The Hamiltonian approach is centered on a strong central government with more regulation on economic affairs, whereas Jeffersonianism is characterized by an emphasis on federalism and state control of economic policies. Although politics have largely been economically driven, social issues, especially in the mid-1800s and the modern era, have also had major implication on party ideals.
The Founding Fathers had both studied and witnessed the consequences of human selfishness, from the rise and fall of Athens to Shays' rebellion under the Articles, and thus, despite their omission of political parties from the Constitution, built a government which could not only withstand but thrive on division. The Fathers created a system that, much like Smith's vision of a free market, would expect and benefit from people acting on their self-interest, from ambition counteracting ambition, as Madison described it in Federalist 51. Our democracy allows for the competition between two parties of cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men to result in at least a stalemate and at most a benefit for the American people.
Conflicts in politics have been consistent throughout American history. The original party split was mainly due to differences in economic reach, as Hamilton was a spokesman for the more urban and commercial interests, while Jefferson looked out for agrarian and state interests. Hamilton pushed for controversial programs like a national bank, a manufacturing program, and a national government assumption of debt. Jefferson summed up the Democratic-Republican resistance when he said, "I'm not a friend to a very energetic government," and argued for a decentralized agrarian republic. Those differences persisted into Jacksonian democracy, where present and progressive era fight over laissez-faire economics, and were seen through current political environment with fights over healthcare, the ACA, stimulus, ARP, and more.
During times of unified government, only almost one half of America is not represented. This prohibits those with opposing points of view from being able to take action in Congress, leading to less compromise and instead one party controlling laws passed. This can be seen as beneficial, however, as having a unified government means our government will get more things done and be more efficient because of the cohesiveness and general agreement that comes with having one party in charge. This is especially helpful during Reconstruction, when the Constitution was radically reworked with the 13th through 15th Amendments, and in the 1930s, when the Democrats were able to pass the New Deal, revolutionizing the national government's relationship to the economy. Constitutional scholar Bruce Ackerman considers this a moment of constitutional politics rather than normal politics, since the American people renegotiated the terms of their social contract.
A divided government has another set of advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages of a divided government are that it incites intense debates, forces compromise, and requires broad-based coalitions to support new policies, all due to gridlock. However, there's also disadvantages. Oftentimes, nothing ever moves, and there's a prevalence of delayed action. Ever since the first parties originated in America, political parties have remained a necessary evil to keep our nation stable in matters such as economics, foreign policy, and the size of the government. Most founding fathers would have agreed with John Adams' statement that political parties are the greatest political evil under our Constitution.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a few questions. There's a very intriguing opening statement. When we're talking about political parties, are we really talking about coherent groups? My colleague Judge Miles has already suggested that a Democrat in Virginia may be different than a Democrat in Alabama. So what are they really coherent organizations, or how would you characterize political parties?
I would definitely say that they're a political or a coherent organization. And I think that the best way to prove this is if you go back in history and look at Martin Van Buren's reason for founding the Democratic Party, which was back then, you had regional politics based and everything. So the South was going to vote one way, the North was going to vote one way, the Mid-Atlantic, the rural, the urban areas, they're all voting differently. And he's like, we need to consolidate our power into one thing to have a chance to win these elections on the national level and really take control of the House. So although obviously, a Democrat in West Virginia is probably different than a Democrat in, Washington State, but they certainly do operate under the same banner of the Democratic Party, and that's necessary for them to be able to have their party function. Because if everybody was, only a Democrat in name but didn't at least share some common ideas, then the party wouldn't really exist because the people wouldn't be satisfied who elected them with what they said.
And another way you can look at it is, as described in Federalist 10, as just factions. It's these groups of people with similar ideals. And, the way our system sets it up is so that they come together in parties using popular sovereignty so that they can get into the government and make those changes a reality.
That's not to say that these parties aren't changing at all times. If you can look at the Populist Party, they did take votes away from the Democrats. So then the Democratic Party did absorb some of those ideals. So these parties' ideals may be shifting constantly, but I do think that they are unified nationwide for the most part.
I'm intrigued by Dr. Stewart's question and by your grasp of it. But are political parties really, and Skylar and I've talked about this a number of times at the national finals when we would sit together at dinner time when Emily would give him a night off to let us talk. Are political parties really a pure philosophy that people rally around? Or are they really, in my opinion, one of the most profound rulings of the Supreme Court, profound only in terms of the incredible effect it had, was Citizens United, where they would let large corporations and large lobbies give large amounts of money to groups of candidates. Is there really a Democratic Party philosophy and a Republican Party philosophy? Or on the one hand, let's say the Republicans, it's the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies and the AMA and some others. And on the other side, it's the education lobby and sections of the Bar Association that have to pony up the money. Skylar told me what his budget was the first time he had to run. And I only had to run countywide in my county, but his budget was 3 times what mine was. Are political parties about the money? Is it about who it is that supports them financially in order to elect their candidates? Or is it the way your essay said, where it's pure political philosophy that drives them?
I would go to say that a lot of it is economically driven, especially with a lot of the new campaign finance laws that do allow the Democrats and the Republicans to stay in power. And especially with the increased use of media, some of these third parties do not have the finances to keep up with the Democratic and Republican Party in terms of media exposure. So I think that has a large amount of substance to it. And similar to Citizens United, I think if we look at Buckley v. Vallejo, it's a similar idea in that the Democratic and Republican parties, it is very strongly economically driven.
However, as is the case when you're debating anything in our government, there's no clear-cut answer. It's not just economics driving elections, and it's not just people, but it's definitely a mix of both. Obviously, candidates in the modern times need these large donations from large corporations to be able to finance their campaign. But the whole purpose of a campaign is to fuel that popular sovereignty and to get people to vote. And the reason people are able to vote is kind of obviously going back to the 15th Amendment, but their First Amendment right to kind of voice their opinion and voice their concern for social issues.
Has social media made it less expensive to run for office, or do you have to spend more money to counter what people say about you on social media?
I think it definitely increased just because with this mass media, you also have more reach to more people.
Yeah.
More people are now invested in these elections. Not that there has been in the past, but with this reach, you really need to have this pursuance. We have these elections on a national scale, and they're televised. Everybody has access to it. Everybody can go and see, they're now forming of their own opinions and about the election. So no, I think it certainly increased the need for spending just due to that mass reach.
Have there been occasions when the political party system has failed? And do those occasions provide any lessons for us in our national politics?
I think a great example of that is the election of Abraham Lincoln, where, the South could vote against Lincoln all they want, and it didn't matter. The North had enough electoral votes to put Lincoln in office, and the Southern states were like, well, we're never going to get any representation in the federal government. This isn't fair. And obviously we see how that went. They, seceded and started their own country. So I think that's a major failure of political parties and of our political system.
Well, you earlier, your team mentioned the idea of in an earlier era, we were we had regional politics. Would the party system of today, is it susceptible to the same kind of failure that you've just noted happened during the Civil War era?
I would argue that it is, because you can win the presidential election by only winning 11 states, and due to that through the electoral college. So I remember reading it one time. If you won those 11 states by like 0.1%, you could win with 26% of the popular vote and still become the president of the United States. I think that you do definitely still leave the potential for, due to the electoral college and geographical isolation, for something like that to happen.
I wouldn't say it's as prevalent today with the exposure of social media because people are seeing different views and seeing the truth for themselves versus in the original days of political parties, all you heard was what the representative from your town brought back from these large scale meetings and such. So I wouldn't say it's as divided, but I would say there are still regional differences.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Let me give you a few comments, and my colleagues will also. This was a wonderfully sophisticated discussion. I think you should be proud of what you have accomplished. At one level, you cut off a lot of my questions because as you were saying something, I would say, well, I'm going to ask them about this, and then you would address that in your presentation or in response to another question. And particularly like the idea about the evolution of the parties over time. You know, what a Democrat is in one place is not what a Democrat is in another place, and the same with over time. And you address that very clearly. You win the award for the most effective use of Martin Van Buren. That is, I'm not sure that there's an award, but I'll suggest to the Senate if they adopt that. What I would have really liked to have had more time to talk with you about, because I'm so confident you could have addressed it well, is this idea of third parties. You mentioned the Populist Party. You mentioned how third parties are disadvantaged in finances, but it blended in with your discussion of the kind of constantly changing positions. And I would have liked to have integrated that into our discussion of media, because one of the things I'm finding in my teaching is, and I'm still not sure about the implications of financing, but when I show my students ads from presidential races, they will comment, "Oh, I've never seen that ad." Well, part of it is we're narrowcasting a lot of these, that we've so micro-targeted campaigns that we know how, we've got a sense of what will motivate you, and we send you the feed on so what we're calling social media, but it's really targeted. If you're not going to be moved by that, we never show it to you. But let me commend you for again, the sophistication of your knowledge and understanding. And I very much enjoyed our discussion, and you should be proud of your performance today.
Boy, I agree with that. What a great analysis, and I agree with his comment too. There's a lot of people that feel like in Alabama, I'm gonna speak for my state, that the real power is not the people that are walking around down there on the floor of the legislature. It's the people that gave them the money back home, that the utility companies and the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the forestry association in my state, because that's a pretty big thing, hire these people to get down there and accomplish certain things, and they have to call back to those businesses or to their lobbyists to talk to them. I'd love to talk with you about lobbyists for a while, because then I'd have asked Skylar to get back on the screen here with us. I asked you a lot about the money, but I can tell you that money doesn't always get you what you want. I gave a campaign contribution to Schuyler Van Valkenburg. I still have a copy of the check. And in all of his terms in the legislature, he's never called me to ask how he should vote on something. He's never asked me if I need him to sponsor a bill for me. To this moment, he's never checked with me about how he should vote on something. I'm not getting my money's worth out of that contribution. And if you see him blushing right now, you know that I'm telling you the way it is, the way it absolutely is. But I would give anything in this world if he could be my representative in the Alabama legislature, or if I could live in his district, I'd put his sign in my front yard. Joe was right. It was a very sophisticated thing. Invite me back sometime and I'll give you some more stuff about Schuyler. We can talk a long time about that if you'd like to. That would be just fine. Joe, I think we had a little bit more time to ask him questions today because I think our timer put the time card away and just let us talk to him as long as we wanted. Kind of funny how that worked today. I don't know how that is.
You know, those Virginia people, they'll change the voting rules.
They'll change the rules. They'll change the rules on you, right? You're exactly right.
That would never happen. That would never happen in Alabama or South Carolina.
No, not down here. Well, it would if we could affect the rules. We just don't have any impact on it down here. But now we see him.
Let's let Dr. Rogers give his comment.
Doc, straighten us out a little bit.
So I concur with the comments of my colleagues. It was a very sophisticated presentation, answered the question very thoroughly, sort of worked from the Hamilton versus Jefferson sort of view of the structure of the federal system as being the central division between the parties over time. Good references to scholars, Will Entz, Ackerman. I thought the Martin Van Buren answer was terrific. It's exactly the right point to sort of come back as a counter point to John Adams and George Washington's view of political parties. Van Buren thought, parties were a good way to channel the different, visions of Americans and to create the coalitions. The discussion of Van Buren's idea of creating coalitions is right on the money, just very, very well done. I wish we had more time to hear an answer to my question about instances where the party system failed. I agree that certainly the election of 1860 is an example, although I think there's more to it than was explained. It's not simply that the South felt it wasn't represented. I think it's not that they weren't, but they felt not represented. But there's more to it. The realignment of the parties, so Republicans are in the North, and the Democrats are in the South. The fears that that the Lincoln administration was an abolitionist administration, which it was not. So there's a lot going into why that party, that system failed at that point and led to secession movement in the Civil War. And are there other instances? I mean, why might we call the situation recently, where a minority in Congress can block most legislation, or where as you were discussing, a small part of the the electorate can elect a president. I think more could have been said about that. So, but that's frosting on the cake, and you gave a very solid presentation, and I appreciated it.
Thank you.